In the Hebrew text here, we can't see in English word plays and poetic devices. And there's also a kind of holy satire here. Now, we can in part see that. Notice in verse 5, it says, "But the Lord," what? "Came down to see the city and the tower which the sons of men had built." Now, of course, God doesn't really have to come down in a geographical or spatial sense in some way to see what man is doing. God sees and knows everything all the time. This is what's called anthropomorphic language. You got that, right? Well, that means speaking of God in human terms. And it's also satire. It's a way of poking fun at man's arrogance, showing it up for how stupid it is. Here are the builders of Babel, building their city, this great tower that they're so proud of. No one has ever built anything as great and as wonderful as this. It reaches into the very heavens. But God actually has to stoop. He has to come down to look at it. It's not so impressive after all. The Empire State Building, that new skyscraper that they've built now to replace the Twin Towers. Now, they may look really tall and impressive from the ground, but if you've ever flown over them in an airplane at a high altitude, what do they look like? Well, they look like little pimples on the face of the earth. The Great Wall of China, how amazing and magnificent. What a monument to human achievement. But I still remember when I flew over China, was going there to teach, and we flew over a segment of China where you could see the Great Wall of China out the window. It looked like a little squiggly line, like a little piece of spaghetti lying on the earth. The city and tower of Babel may have greatly impressed the builders. Didn't impress God. It was puny in his eyes. He has to come down even to look at it. Divine investigation. And then we have divine assessment. God assesses the situation. We've already looked at that, verse 6. The Lord said, "Indeed, the people are one," so on and so on. And then we have divine action. What's God do? Verse 7, "Come, let us go down, and there confuse their language, that they may not understand one another's speech." So the Lord scattered them abroad from there over the face of all the earth, and they ceased building the city. So God acts to thwart their efforts, and all their grandiose schemes come to nothing. And God always does this. When peoples and nations set themselves against God, you can count on it. They are eventually brought to nothing. God did exactly the same thing later to that great city, Nineveh. He did the same thing to Babylon and to Greece and to Rome. He did it to Napoleon. He did it to Hitler. You know, Hitler and the Nazis boasted that the Third Reich would last for 1,000 years. They called it the 1,000-year Reich. That's what they called it. 12 years, 4 months, 8 days later, it came crashing down. And Hitler himself committed suicide. Cities of man, trying to build a world empire without God, the true God of the Bible. He lets them go so far. But then he suddenly comes down, and it's all destroyed. And these are all just little foretastes of the final judgment that is yet to come. And then Moses summarizes this event in verse 9. "Therefore its name is called Babel, because there the Lord confused the language of all the earth, and from there the Lord scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth." And here again we have a play on words. Babel is in the general area of what later is the ancient city of Babylon. A city that will come to be used as a symbol throughout the Bible for human culture and human civilization and false religions in rebellion against God. Well, here we have a play on words. Babylon is partly derived from the word Babili. What does that mean? The gate of the gods. That's the way the Babylonians like to think of themselves. Babili. But God, through Moses, gives this original city of Babylon the name Babel, which means confusion. Babili, the gate of the gods. No, it's Babel. It's confusion. All attempts to build a world without God only lead to confusion. it will come to nothing. Well, let's gather all of this up with some pointed words of application to every one of us here today. We've been doing that all along. But what are some lessons I can leave with us to take home with us today from this passage, all right? First of all, be reminded of how much God hates human pride. He hates it. And let us learn how foolish it is as well. I think again of that famous poem I mentioned at the beginning, Invictus. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. It's laughable, really, if it weren't so sad. Or that song, I did it my way. How foolish, stupid, how offensive such human pride and arrogance is to God. God alone is the master of my fate. And He is the master of the fate of every single person in this building this morning. And God alone is great. In 1715, Louis XIV of France died. You may remember he called himself Louis the Great. And he is famous for his brash statement, I am the state. Well, I read some time ago that about him, about his court. It was the most lavish in Europe. His funeral was the most spectacular funeral. His body was laid in a golden coffin. To dramatize his greatness, orders were given that the cathedral would be dimly lit. It kind of sounds like the pregame before an NBA All-Star game, or before the Super Bowl, or the Olympic show before the Olympics started. It just gets more dramatic every time we have it, doesn't it? Trying to outdo itself. Pop music awards or the Academy Awards. All the trying to dramatize it all and make it so big and wonderful and great and amazing. Well, so it was with, in a sense, with the funeral of Louis the Great, Louis XIV. And the cathedral was to be dimly lit with a special candle set above the coffin. Thousands were waiting before the coffin in hushed silence. And then Bishop Massillon began to speak. I don't know much about him, but I like this. Here's what he did. Slowly reaching down, he snuffed out the candle. And he said this, only God is great. Only God is great. My friend, only God is great. And self-autonomous human glory is a joke. Nothing but folly. Proverbs 16:5, everyone proud in heart is an abomination to the Lord. Psalm 138:6, though the Lord is on high, yet He regards the lowly, but the proud He knows afar off. Luke 14:11, for whoever exalts himself shall be abased. Proverbs 16:8, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Ask the Babel builders about that. Ask Nebuchadnezzar about that, the king of Babylon, at a later time. You remember, we considered that not too long ago. You remember we read